It seems every month that goes by, more and more e-bike products get launched. But do you actually need e-bike specific components on your bike? Or are they pure marketing? In short, are they fact or are they fad? It's time to find out. So to find out then, we've partnered with Fox Suspension to look at the ins and outs of e-bike specific components. Why Fox? Well, arguably they were ahead of the curve when they came out with their e-bike fork many years ago, probably before many people had even thought about it. Well, it's not actually quite as straightforward as that, because the demands of your e-bike components are going to vary massively. Take, for example, e-bike touring compared to e-bike downhill. Now, the tourist rider, they're going to need such things as comfort and range on their e-bike, whereas, say, the downhiller is going to need a bike that's going to be able to take those collisions and brakes that's going to anchor you up on the downhills. Now, you only have to look at the differences between an e-bike and a traditional bike, such things as more distance, more descending, more system torque, more vertical gain, higher power outputs, and also higher average speed. I tell you what, if my body's feeling it, those components are going to be. So whether it's shuttling, towing your kid, a doctor doing the rounds, an asthmatic, an old or young ripper hitting some big gaps, component requirements are specific to the use that that type of riding demands. And it's only really e-bike specific if it does the job that you want it to do. In many ways, the same as, say, a cross-country fork would not be specific to a downhill bike or a normal acoustic mountain bike. So whether it be wheels, tyres, chains or suspension, in theory, it's just a question of working out what intended use warrants an e-mountain bike specific tag and what doesn't. In short, what is fit for purpose? Now, a good place to start, or should I say stop, when it comes to the specifics of e-bike products, I think braking is a key one. Now, it doesn't really matter whether you're talking steep descents or mellow descents. Heat management on brakes on e-bikes is really, really important. And we actually found this out for ourselves in the recent Tour de Mont Blanc, where we were doing about 60,000 feet of descending in 3 days. Now, an e-bike is in general slightly heavier than a traditional bike, which means it's going to carry a lot more speed, which in turn needs more braking power. When it comes to the products, we're seeing a lot of products on the market, and one of the key things is managing the heat dissipation systems on these brakes. We're seeing 200mm rotors, 220mm rotors even on some brands, 4-pot piston, finned pads, and in general, a far more durable, bulky system than you're getting on, say, a lightweight cross-country bike, because let's face it, on e-bikes, you're going to be doing a ton more descending than on a traditional bike. So, e-bike suspension, why is it important? Well, first of all, as I mentioned, e-bikes are heavier than traditional bikes, and that means you need more braking. And of course, braking is very closely linked to suspension. Good suspension equals good braking. The second thing is that suspension is very closely linked with traction. And as we all know, we're doing a lot of climbing on our e-bike. So having a very compliant suspension is going to have a positive effect on your climbing technique as well. I think we can look at 4 main areas to help you identify whether your suspension is actually fit for purpose. And I think the first thing to look at is actually the type of riding you do. Because let's face it, we all do different types of e-biking. Some of us do touring style e-biking on fire roads and tarmac roads, whilst other riders spend their time on roots, rocks, and really steep descents. Now, the second thing is the integrity of the product that you're dealing with. Let's face it, we've ridden some questionable bikes in some questionable places. In other words, they weren't really fit for the purpose that it was intended. The number 3 on my list is actually to do with rideaways. And I'm saying this from a common sense point of view rather than any rules and regulations that surround it. Take this bike I have here. It's an e-bike, obviously, with 150mm travel, weighs in at about 20 kilos. I'm 90 kilos. Now, I tend to ride more gravity-orientated riding, and I'm always going to choose the sturdier, bulkier fork than a skinnier fork. In this instance, I've got a 36mm Fox fork on here, as opposed to their 34mm stanchion e-bike fork, which you might be using for trail style riding. Now, that doesn't mean to say that if you're a lighter rider or ride at different speeds, you cannot ride black style trails on a 34mm stanchion fork. That's simply not true. It just comes down to the type of rider you are, the type of riding you do, and your weight. You need to use your common sense when you're putting this all together. Now, the final and arguably the most important consideration to take into account is the system weight. Now, by the system weight, I mean the combined weight of you, the rider, and the bike, because there is in fact some manufacturing regulations surrounding this. Suffice to say that my Fox fork meets those. I tell you what, when it comes to descending, you definitely need the bigger fork if you're a bigger rider. But Fox don't only do the Fox 36 fork, they also do the 34. So I think it's about time to head over to Doddy in the studio to give us a rundown of both forks.
So when it comes to suspension on e-bikes, really it comes down to them needing to be much stiffer and a bit more appropriately tuned for e-bike riders and the weight of the bikes. So typically you get a Fox 32, a 34 and a 36. The 32 doesn't exist for e-bikes. It's simply not beefy enough to handle the additional strain that the heavier bikes and the way that you're going to ride them does to the bikes. There's the 34 and the 36. The 34 basically deals with bikes like this. It's a trail riding fork, and it also takes in the lower end of the market where you're a bit more XC biased riders. So down to 120mm travel, a bit more simple on damping terms. The similarities between the 34 and the 36 is the fact that the steerer is reinforced, it's heavier duty, the crown is heavier duty, and the upper legs, the stanchion tubes on them, same on the 36, they're beefier, they're thicker, they're much stronger and stiffer, which is really important for handling, especially when you're braking, because you're putting so much more load through that bike. They also have a slightly different compression tune, again, to stop the bike feeling so wallowy. When it comes to the bigger 36, this is what you want for jumping, riding, the sort of stuff that Chris and Steve do quite regularly, really rough terrain. Now, available in two options, you've got performance and the factory. The performance has the black legs on there, and it has a slightly more basic grip damper on there. When it comes to the factory, of course, this has the Kashima coated uppers, just better performance all round with that. And it has the Grip 2 damper. So this has got four-way damping, super high performance. It has adjustable high and low speed compression and high and low speed rebound. A very, very high performance fork. Yeah, so clearly it's a fact, these are e-bike specific. And of course the reason for that is all about the stiffness and that strength. It really does make a big difference. Now you could put a normal fork on there and it will have a bit more flex. You're still going to be able to ride the fork. It's not suddenly not going to work on a bike, but really you will notice that extra flex and it's going to feel a lot more wallowy. You'll end up having to add on loads of compression to stop it feeling wallowy, and you're actually going to make the fork feel worse by doing that.
You could argue, I suppose, that if you're riding flat fire roads such as this, you don't really need e-bike specific wheels. But think again, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be doing higher distances, you're going to be doing more descending, you're going to be doing more vertical gain, and crucially there's going to be more system torque and more power going through those wheels. So I think when it comes to wheels, you're going to be looking at stronger free hubs, oversized bearings and stainless steel ratchets. So when it comes to e-bike specific wheels, fact or fad, I very much feel that it's fact. Gears and chains, where do we stand with those components? Well, there's several on the market, such as SRAM's EX1. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I probably do way more climbing and descending than I've ever done, so that has a massive effect on my body. It's also going to have a huge effect on the drivetrain on your e-bike. I think when it comes to drivetrain though, I think I'm now going to hand you over to our tech wizard, Andrew Dodd.
Okay, so e-bike specific transmissions. Yeah, actually this one is a fact. You could use a regular transmission on a bike, but you're in danger really of snapping a chain. That's your first thing. And the reason for that is you're just accidentally going to shift too much. You can chew through stuff. The same goes for the rear mech there. So the first thing that really sets the transmissions apart is the shifter. So SRAM make an e-bike specific shifter, and the thing that makes it different is you can only shift up one at a time and down one at a time. It's for self-preservation. Does mean your shifting feels really punchy and nice, and because you're not riding a normal bike, you don't really need to go handfuls through the gears because you've got that assistance with the power. So it's a very sensible idea. It works really effectively and essentially preserves your drivetrain. The cassette is the next thing that does have a few different things going on. So they make an e-bike specific one with 8-speed on there because sometimes you don't need that full spread of gears. Now it's a bit tougher, it's heavier duty, but you can also have the bigger spread of gears if that tickles your fancy. For example, if you wanted to run a 12-speed Eagle setup, you couldn't do it really, well, you could do it with the basic Eagle cassette, but you risk stripping the thing because it's very lightweight. It's not designed to have this torque going through it. So in which case you want the steel version, as you can see on this bike here. So it doesn't have the 1050 spread, it has an 1150 spread because the design is very slightly different, but it's much heavier duty, much more durable. And really, you think what you're doing to that bike with that transmission, you're absolutely putting so much torque through it the whole time. You definitely need a steel cassette on the back, so that is definitely a fact. E-bike chains, they're mostly the same, but some brands like KMC actually offer an e-bike specific chain which is slightly different, a bit heavier, and the pins themselves are bigger. The downside, of course, obviously the chain is quite a heavy component anyway. They're very heavy, but it could potentially be a lot stronger and resistant against snapping chains. So if that sounds like something you're doing, maybe you should check them out.
Now I'm going to dive straight in and say that e-bike specific saddles are very much a fact and not a fad. Okay, we're at the early days of their development, but nevertheless there are some key features which make them e-bike specific. I guess the only way you can find out whether it's specific or not is to go to the places you've never been before and to the kind of distances you might not have covered before. What about the detail? Well, there's many companies on the market making them. You've got SQ Labs, you've got Proxim, and you've got Ergon. Now, let me just show you a couple of features on this Ergon saddle. You've got the tilt on the back of the saddle there, which helps you get up those super steep climbs. And also, it keeps your bum in place. Now, when you're climbing on an e-bike, you definitely tend to sit down a lot more than when you're on a non-e-bike. But there's another part of that which you need to cover as well, is that you need to keep your bum firmly on the saddle, because if you've got a seat which is too hard, then you're going to be bouncing around quite a lot, which is going to in turn lead to a loss of traction. E-bike products then, well, we've often seen it's not just a case of them being fact or fad. There are actually manufacturing regulations governing the products on your e-bike, such as the tyres or the suspension. Where's it all going? Well, I have no doubt there will be a ton more products coming onto the market in the near future, but ultimately it's actually down to you and the rider, and are those parts, are those components suitable for the purpose that they were made for? If you're going to Red Bull Rampage, maybe you'd need a Fox 40 on your bike rather than a Fox 36. I don't know, it depends on the type of riding you're going to be doing in the Utah desert. For me personally, I've just been on a big trip to Mont Blanc. I did a tour of Mont Blanc and I learned a load of things there which I'd never dreamt of before. Let's know your thoughts about this discussion about e-bike specific components in the comments down below. Give us a thumbs up if you liked the video, and don't forget to hit on the globe to see more e-bike content.